I'm convinced the whole world just wants to be Jewish. Everyone started wearing masks just before Purim. They started panic buying just before Pesach. And then everyone started counting days and weeks in quarantine and refraining from taking a haircut just before the Omer. Then in July, I leave my house and everyone's standing in line to buy new clothes and have their haircut just before the 3 weeks. The 3 weeks, of course, that very sad period when we're not allowed to have our haircut, buy new clothes or hold weddings. So basically, like the rest of 2020.
So it's Erev Shabbat Zachor, right before Purim, a perfect time to speak about Megillah Esther. So I'm with Mr. Michael Eisenberg, founder and partner of Aleph, a venture capital company, and a father of 8 children, 2 grandchildren, Li'ayin Hara, and a wonderful family friend, and for the purposes of our discussion, the author of 5 different Sfarim. Can you quickly tell us what you've written about?
So the first Sefer I put out is called Ben Baruch, in honor of my father. His name is Baruch, about the Talmud Yerushalmi in Masechet Brachot. The second book, which came out in Hebrew and English, is called Kacha Yaseh LaYehudi, or The Vanishing Jew in English, which is about Megillat Esther, our topic. And then I've published 3 volumes of what, please God, will be a 5-volume series on the economics of Parshat Shavua. The series is called Eitz HaChaim VaKesef. The first Sefer on Bereshit, Eitz HaChaim VaKesef. The second one on Shemot Kol Echad Moshe Rabbeinu. And the one that just came out this week on Vayikra, a topic dear to your heart, is called Shevet Shoeg, on Kalkalat HaAchva, or the economics of fraternity and brotherhood.
It's really remarkable. I have to say it's inspiring just to hear how someone so involved in the world of business, economics, sees it as very much integrated in the world of Torah.
But most importantly, our families have been friends for many
That's
years.
Right. That was really the first
and my wife is a Talmidah of yours.
And usually so.
And a friend, and you've been spreading Torah the world over through this Mizrahi event and in Matan, and so it's really an honor to be here.
Michael, an honor to have you here, and thank you for coming all the way to the Gush.
Pleasure.
To have this
cold here.
Conversation. Cold, rainy, you still see some of the snow on the ground. So we're going to get started with discussing some of the characters in Megillat Esther. There's a tremendous amount of primary characters, secondary characters, tertiary characters. So if I were to ask you, when you look at the Megillah, who do you see as the primary characters?
Maybe I should reverse the question. You're the
Okay.
Who do you as the primary character in this rich tapestry of characters?
So as we open up, right, it's clear that Achashverosh is going to play a major role. And this seems to be somewhat ironic, as we see him at times in a very passive role, almost duped and guiled time and time again by other characters. Mordechai, who's introduced already in Perek Bet, Haman, the protagonist of the Sefer, and Esther, who begins actually as a very passive character, only as we see throughout the story, throughout Perek really Dalet and Hey, transforms herself from a secondary character to a primary character. So those are the ones that I see. So,
it's quite amazing that we call the queen a secondary or passive character until she turns. And it's a lot about politics today. People can be anonymous for a while and then somehow turn up on the scene. My personal view is that the primary characters, or the most important characters of Megillat Esther, are 2 surprising people, which are Bigthan and Teresh.
Wow. I don't think we'd get that answer from most people. And why is that?
Nobody ever wanted to dress up as Bigthan and Teresh for Purim, which I guess makes them tertiary. I think they're the primary characters. I think we can prove it. The Megillah turns around the Mahapach, or the turn of the Megillah, in Perek Vav. And what happens in Perek Vav? Achashverosh, who, as you said, introduced to right at the beginning, can't sleep. And he asks that the Sefer HaZichronot be brought. Vayimatzei katuv asher higid Mordechai al Bigtana v'Teresh shnei sarisei melech mishomer hasaf. That story of Mordechai and Bigtan v'Teresh is the absolute turning point of the Megillah. Then, of course, Haman comes in and they parade Mordechai through the streets. And so, my view is that the little story that appears before Haman rises to power, which I'll touch on in a second, they're the fundamental turning point characters of the Megillah. And as you pointed out, Haman as a protagonist is also the prototype, I guess, after Paro, of anti-Semitism. And his rise to power, et Haman ben Amdasa, what's Achar Dvarim Ha'eleh? Right after the story of Bigthan and Teresh and Mordechai unraveling their plot to kill the king.
It's so interesting that you said that, because Chazal talk about how the stories remind us of the stories of Yosef in Mitzrayim, and how HaKadosh Baruch Hu planned, just like he planned for Sar HaMashkim and Sar HaOpim, to plot against the king so that they would end up in the dungeon with Yosef, so that then Yosef could rise to power through Sar HaMashkim and interpreting the dreams. Chazal say so too in the story of Mordechai, that Hashem planned this all out so that Mordechai can rise to power. So really, your assessment of characters, Chazal corroborate and say they're really the major people who allow for Mordechai to be remembered and for the Ben HaHachochu to take place. I even find that their names are so interesting, right? So what do you think of their names, Bigthan and Teresh?
More than their names, I find the titles fascinating.
Shomrei Asaf.
The Shomrei Asaf. There's Sarisei Melech Mishomrei Asaf. Now, Sarisim, as we all know, are people without children.
Worse than that, they're castrated.
They're castrated,
They're eunuchs in Achashverosh's court.
And they necessarily, therefore, have no children, which means they have no future. Which means the only thing they care about is the present. And I think if you are in service of a government or a king or a state and you have no future, you're focused on your national identity and the present. And then the second thing is Shomrei Asaf is a fascinating category. We read in last week's Haftarah, the first time Shomrei Asaf, to the best of my knowledge, is mentioned in Tanakh. Who are the Kohanim Shomrei Asaf? They watch over the, lack of a better term, the tzedakah box. The treasury of the Mishkan, of the Mikdash. And so the Shomrei Asaf are the people who are the accountant general, or they are the secretary of the treasury of Persia. And what these two eunuchs care about is the treasury, the department of the treasury of old Persia. And that's all they care about. And then they go to the gallows, and the next thing that happens is Achashverosh appoints Haman, who offers 10,000 kikar kesef. And so that's, I think, a fundamental point about who they are. But what were you thinking about the names?
So I was thinking, again, Bigthan, we see the word bag in Sefer Daniel as Pat Bag HaMelech. So he is in charge of the bread of the bag. In other words, he's the Sar HaOpim, he's the baker. And who is Teresh? From the word of Tirosh, we all know from our Greek Jews on Friday, he is the Sar HaMashkim. So we literally have these people together who are Shomrei Asaf, because either, as you said, they're really guarding the treasury, or they're the ones closest to the king. They have a personal connection to the king, because we heard in Parak Aleph that he has Shivat Salisim, who are always in front of him. Those are his bodyguards, but these are Shomrei Asaf. These are the ones who are next closest to him.
Interesting.
Bigthan and Teresh. At the same time, I heard from Yoni Grossman, also if you look at their names, Bigthan, Teresh, again, they're also an Atbash. Right?
That's good.
And so they're really like Tweedledum and Tweedledee. In other words, you don't really have to know who they are. These aren't their personal names. This is their title. We have to look, and that's the way that the authors are telling us, look carefully at their function, not so much at their name.
Interestingly, if that's the case, they would actually be, Bigtan then would be the only Aramaic word in the Megillah, which is written in all Hebrew, which is interesting in of itself, because when you think about the fact that the Megillah, written either according to Chazal in the interim period between Churban Beit Mikdash Rishon or Beit Mikdash Shani, or according to Sefer Ezra, the Ibn Ezra, modern day scholars, written somewhere between 70 and 100 years into the return to Eretz Yisrael, it's written in Hebrew. So it's written in Eretz Yisrael.
Yeah,
and so that would make Bigtan the only Aramaic name there, and Teresh would obviously be derived then from the Hebrew. I had not thought of that, and I think that's interesting. I'm not sure what to make of it, but it's interesting.
That's right.
Yeah, but an interesting question for you. What do you make of Haman's rise to power? Why does he rise to power? What's his job when he is appointed? גידל המלך אחשוורוש את המן בן המדסה וישם את כיסאו מעל כל השרים אשר איתו. Why Haman? Where does he come from?
So interesting that we had the last scene is the scene of the coronation party of Esther, which was in the 7th year, and then fast forward, the rest of the Megillah is in the 12th year, beginning with that scene. And you're right, something must have happened in those 5 years. So Chazal tried to fill it in. You know, there were different positions available, and Mordechai and Haman were the next
rivals.
The rivals, and Haman somehow got in. So how do you think he became?
I love how Chazal get into like this realpolitik almost in the Midrash about them being kind of captains together in the army.
That's right, starting off way back.
Yeah, it's kind of realpolitik that you see actually playing out in Israel in many ways today, and in other government things, the government changes. My own view is that there was a story of Esther, and when you compare the parties of when Esther is anointed versus the party at the beginning, there's a dramatic difference. The one at the beginning, 180 days and 7 days, is a gigantic, lavish party. Yeah, feels like I say Hollywood there. And the party for Esther is more tzanua. I call it Corona, right?
Very well said.
The Corona
party.
and,
Beautifully.
And all he does is give out tributes.
Hanacha, mas'et. I always wonder that, meaning that there are all these economic terms that appear in that party, telling us something happened between year 3 and year 7. So maybe it can be understood. Year 3, we know that there was a huge victory over the Greek armada at the time.
Yep.
So this way he was able to literally show off his power and wealth, and somehow, maybe with all the defense investments, maybe he went into some type of deficit at the time.
I think so. Wars create economic downturns, and you look no further than, for example, America's wars in Afghanistan and in Iraq to know that it has a big impact on the budget, and or a virus like Corona, which has a huge impact on the budget. But what do politicians do when they want to keep people happy during times of economic crisis? And I think those intervening years between Perek Aleph and the end of Perek Bet in the Megillah, there's obviously an economic downturn. You see it in the parties. What politicians do is they adopt populist policies and give out a lot of money. Biden is now going to print $1.9 trillion together with the Senate. I hope we can find a good source. Maybe he has his own person will give him 10,000 silvers, but
not at the cost.
No, not at the cost of the Jews, obviously. But economic downturns cause politicians to become populist. Hanacha, mas'et, what Achashverosh doles out at the minimalist Esther party is populist politics, and that ties right into the next story, which is Bigthan and Teresh, the Shomer Asaf, the secretaries of the Treasury, say, what's going on here? And we got less money around. And at least in my view, Haman, despite the Midrash and Chazal, I think he's the new secretary of the Treasury. And he gets up and he offers a 10,000 silver bribe to the king, and the king needs it because the bank is dry.
And that's why when you look carefully, he never once mentions at the cost of the Jews. He just says, he presents them almost like a gypsy people. No one's going to know that they're gone, and this way we'll be able to solve all our budget issues.
But anti-Semitism rises in times of financial stress. It really does. It's true everywhere. There are these two famous historians, economic historians named Blaustein and King, who wrote a paper on pre-war Europe, kind of tracking anti-Semitism through Europe based on 3 factors, ironically. One is economic downturns, and they show how that creates more anti-Semitism. 2 is migration of Jews to a certain neighborhood, therefore changing the balance. And the third is ironically what they call a rise of a left-wing academic that can provide cover for another side of anti-Semitism other than right-wing anti-Semitism.
Very interesting.
And so, on some level. And so, I view Haman as an opportunist who is in the right place at the right time, and finds 10,000 silver talents, I guess as the translation is, from somewhere. I love the Mefarshim going around trying to figure out where is he going to get 10,000 silver talents. It was either he was wealthy, he would take it from the Jews after killing them, or he found it somewhere else. And the king was susceptible.
And I think that...
And I don't think Ahasuerus is an idiot, by the way. I don't buy that he's a fool.
Meaning, you see this also, if you don't mind me, drawing the analogy to the final solution after, Germany's failure in World War I and the economic distress. Again, looking for scapegoats, looking for some way where we can bring more money into the government. if we can kill some Jews and take their money and solve the national crisis, then I guess Achashverosh was just thinking, why not? Not that he was particularly, an anti-Semite, but you believe that, yes.
No, I'm not persuaded that there's that direct a link. I think that economic stress causes people to do unusual things. It's stressful on a family level, economic stress. It's stressful on a community level, and it's stressful on a national level, and stressful on a political level. Just look what's going on. Budget conversations here, Corona. And economics stresses the system. And it brings out lots of bad behaviors on civic levels, on national levels. I don't think there's as straight a line to what happened. There definitely was outrageous inflation in pre-Nazi Germany, and then in Nazi Germany, huge financial stress. I think it's harder to say we'll kill the Jews and take their money. That solution in the Mefarshim for Haman doesn't resonate as much with me. But he is an opportunist, and he's found a bride. How does Megillah progress? Part of the tricky thing is you get out of this thing of Haman, Ha'ir Shushan Navocha, and then Mordechai goes out. Mordechai Yadayat Kol Asher Nasav, Vayikra Mordechai Et Bigadav, and this whole interlude with another interesting character, Hatach, begins to happen.
He's literally, right, what does the name Hatach mean? Tabach?
Yep.
He's intermediary.
He's an intermediary.
Mordechai and Esther can't communicate one with the other now, right? He's representing the populace. She's the bourgeoisie of society.
But he communicates with her in the case of Bigthan and Teresh, right? He calls her directly.
Yes, they're
right?
still talking then.
They're still talking. Something happens around Haman in Perek Gimel. And then Perek Daled, there's now
some disconnect.
Something happened. What happened?
So I think it's been 5 years that Esther is already in the house, in the palace of the king. If we're speaking about Haman, who's really a nationalist, and inspired maybe even by Bigthan and Teresh, then Esther also. Esther has become, very Persian in her culture and in her, to a certain degree, in her identity and her political opinions. And she begins to maybe even put, the country first, definitely, her, as Mordechai reprimands her, right, her own survival. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's the transformation of those 5 years.
And what do you think about Hatach? Who is this guy? He becomes like the name.
Until Chazal can serve his personality as Daniel, right? Who can be both, on the inside and the outside, speaking both languages. And there is something, to appreciating through such a character, both the disconnect between Mordechai and Esther, and then when he disappears, we're then able to appreciate that now we don't need him anymore, right? The two are back.
Although he's disappeared and replaced by an anonymous we.
That's right.
In the Psukim. He's replaced by an anonymous we. My view of him is he's a little bit of a double agent.
Interesting.
He goes back and forth, but he's replaced because at some point either Esther or Mordechai don't trust him. And then there's this anonymous we.
Wow.
In the middle that he gets removed from, and then the story turns again, right? And so you have these people who are fundamental, who we don't dress up like on Purim, Hatach, Bigthan, and Teresh, who are really fundamental. It's what's so rich about the story, and
you're saying they're not really tertiary.
No, they're primary.
That's right. Meaning, generally, you say tertiary characters move and propel the plot along for the secondary, but you're saying no, they do this for the primary characters.
I think so. I think they make them the primary character. It becomes a question there, as is the case of Bigthan and Teresh and Hatach. Who can you trust?
That's right.
In a system under stress, who is trustworthy? And the king finds out that Bigthan and Teresh are not trustworthy, and the queen and Mordechai find out that Hatach is not trustworthy, and none of these people are trustworthy.
And who, I'm just so amazed by this, because now, you're shedding light, that eureka moment.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you for this, because we have, in the first plot, we have Memuchan, right? Suggesting and advising to the king, banish Vashti. Then we have Mordechai in the Bigthan and Teresh scene, and I believe that that's why Achashverosh doesn't reward him right away, right? Why doesn't he reward him?
Interesting.
He's wondering, how does Mordechai know about Bigthan and Teresh? Maybe he was in on it, and he just decided to save himself. And I believe that's why he doesn't give him a reward.
Interesting.
Then you're saying we have Hatach, who I've never heard this perspective before. He's really, the double spy. Can't really trust him who in the end is going to save the day and really get rid of Haman for us? It's going to be Harbona, who I believe really Chazal also identify him. I don't know, good guy, bad guy. Rabbi says, no, he's really a Rasha. How does he know about the tree? Only Zeresh v'Ohavav, only Haman's fan club knows about the tree. So Harbona is really an associate of Haman. And yet, ironically, Gam Harbona Zachor Lato, meaning in the end, we actually are going to give some type of credence and credit to all these, somewhat, as you're saying, primary characters who really we can't trust. We definitely can't trust Harbona.
One of the 5 years after writing the book, one of my takeaways is politics is messy, and the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah who wrote Esther understood politics is messy, and Chazal understood politics is messy. Gam Charvona Zachor Latov, even though he was maybe part of Haman's cabal, okay, we'll give him a nod. Rabba thinks he's a Rasha. He might have also been. Hatach, he kind of served a purpose for a while, and then he's dispensed of. And even, I would argue, Mordechai, he kind of served purposes for a while, and then disappears off the pages of history. And politics is messy. And I had this back and forth with a guy named Zohar Atkins, who I actually don't know. We've only communicated. But he's kind of a philosopher, well-read Jewish scholar. And he wrote me a note a couple of days ago saying that priests, Kohanim, are conformists. Prophets are visionaries, people who break the systems and can see very far. And generally, kind of religious leadership is more conforming. Entrepreneurial people and prophets who go against the grain break systems. And now I'm sitting here thinking about it, and I think that politicians, or kings, as we talked about on the introductor here, are kind of really complicated characters. They're opportunistic, and people get involved in politics, even if it's out of a sense of service. There's a lot of, the art of the possible in politics, right? Maybe more than the art of the correct or right in politics.
Maybe that's why Chazal deliberate whether or not to canonize Megillah Esther. I don't know, do we want to present politics as so complicated? Especially, what's the religious message? So an economical message, a political message, but how about religious? I believe that Chazal are also telling us, the subtext of, as you mentioned, the chronological context, right? They're telling us that this is really satirical, right? We're telling you, particularly in Chutz La'aretz, you think, politics in Israel is complicated, going on for your fourth elections in 2 years, but look at what goes on really in every country. And the question is whether or not we read it correctly, whether or not we appreciate those messages of, whether it's the cant or the hiding of our identity. We don't really know. We don't know is Satach good or bad. And I believe even when Chazal preserve him as Daniel, they say, yes, as a punishment.
Yeah.
Right? So he's good here or he's bad here. And,
well, Daniel's a complicated character also.
Complicated character.
And
that's right. And I think the complication, Chazal is also telling us, is because you are working for another power. Even Mordechai, who becomes the viceroy, like Yosef, that's very complicated, right? It leads, as we know, it's a Shibud Mitzrayim. It leads to complications. And maybe they're telling us, if you would come back to Israel, it's true, politics is very complicated here, but at least there's no hiding of identity. At least I think sometimes we see this, definitely, in the news these days. We're not sure, is he really working for whom? What really is his idea? Is this just to secure votes? But bottom line, everyone who's here is really working to propel Am Yisrael forward.
You mentioned elliptically Rabbi Yosef Bechor Shor's Perush at the beginning of Sefer Shemot, that where he says, strikingly, that Yosef's economic policies to the Mitzrayim caused Shabud Mitzrayim. It caused the slavery of 210 years. And you go, whoa. Right. And it raises all these questions of identity and politics in diasporic life. And oftentimes we don't know the effects of it until time rolls on. I think it's not an accident that the Megillah happens over all these years. Part of the story that the Anshe Knesset Hagdolah canonize here is that things are a process. And you think one thing at the beginning of the story, another thing in the middle of the story, and a third thing at the end of the story, and it's complicated. And it's not just complicated. We said before that the Megillah is written in Hebrew, so it's almost written as a letter from the people of Eretz Yisrael to their brothers in Persia, in the diaspora, saying, "Pay attention, guys. This is
That's right.
not trivial.
Not trivial. Why are you looking at Shushan as Havira, not Yerushalayim as Havira? Why are you looking at the Chatzar Ginat Bigthan HaMelech as if it's the Beit HaMikdash? Looking at Achashverosh as the Kohen Gadol? Looking at all these characters, even the positive ones, as you're positing, as maybe not so positive, meaning come back and stop hiding your identity, right? And there are so many illusions within the Megillah, whether it's the 70 days that we're in distress. And Yom L'Shana, you didn't get the message of 70 years of Galut, and whether it's, Vashti, the idea who also positive, negative character. On one hand, she's also very good looking, a foil for Esther, setting the scene for Esther Hamalka. At the same time, letters have to go out of, Koli so rare b'beito, what are you doing as second-class citizens in Persia when you can be your first-class citizens in Eretz Yisrael?
As we play this Megillah forward and we get to the end, obviously there's the last two prakim or three prakim of Megillah are complicated. Is that fair to say?
Yes, 100%. So let's continue with the economic idea and the plan. Again, that began at the beginning of the story. And how do you see it playing out at the ends of the story?
Well,
those complicated prakim.
Obviously there is the victory itself, claiming 75,000 or so lives.
What do you feel is the significance of that? The Jews don't touch the money. So if it's about the money, why don't we take it?
Well, they were offered to take the money, by the way.
That's right.
By Mordechai. The Jewish people don't take the money. I think the civic sense, as I often do, the civic sense is better than the leader sense.
Okay.
And there's wisdom of the crowds among the Jewish people that I think was more sensible than perhaps the leadership. The most obviously similar Megillah in Tanakh is Ruth. There's also a feminine hero. It also has economic downturn. By Hirav Ba'aretz, and it gets better. It comes back to Boaz, and they're now picking tzirchitim, and there's enough food for the poor people to collect behind them, and it gets better. When you compare the two ends of these Megillahs, it's deafening. The end of Megillat Ruth, twice we have the Shoshelet David HaMelech, and everyone has children, and Yulad Ben and Naomi,
and a bayit is secure,
and the house is secure. And the end of the Megillah, crickets, as they say, and there's Mordechai, Esther, etc. There's no children there. Yes, Dover Shalom L'chol Zaro, but who are the Zara we don't know, and we know exactly who the Zara is in Megillat Ruth. And I think whoever wrote the Megillah obviously had Megillat Ruth in front of him because it happened way before and was written way earlier. And you say, what happened here?
And I think the authors are pleading with us. I think that's why Chazal say that even during the time of Beit HaMikdash HaShlishi, the words of the Nebi'im and the rest of the Ketuvim are going to be more or less obsolete. But we're still going to have to read Megillat Esther because these are going to be perpetual problems. And think of the words, Zachariah, who tells us, you can cancel all these problems. The tzomot of Asar B'Tevet, Shabbat B'Tammuz, Tish'a B'Av, Tzom Gedalia, can come to Eretz Yisrael on the basis of the Dover Shalom, right? To be able to speak words of peace and truth, Ve'emet B'Shalom Ehavu. And Rabbi Menachem Leibtau points this out as well.
Yeah.
The Emet B'Shalom that Esther is sending out, she basically is saying, come on, everyone get together, right? Build that society. We have the opportunity now, right? Let's come and really let's build it in Eretz Yisrael, in Yerushalayim, which I think is really the echoes of the Megillah. You're right, that it ends with, on one hand, the tragedy, the insecurity, Jews still in the diaspora, but there's that call of, come on, read this every year. And maybe you'll get the message of, there's so many different economic issues. As you said, it's a very politically complex Megillah. It is. We're not even sure who's good, who's bad, who's working on the inside, who's working on the outside. And that's what happens when you're not sure what people's primary identity or allegiance is. But that's why Mordechai and Esther say, you know what you should do with your money? Doesn't make a difference. It goes to the government, it doesn't, you're going to be taxed. Matanot levim.
Yeah.
Give it to your own.
I'll offer a slightly different take. I gave a shiur this morning to a bunch of educators from around the country, not necessarily religious, on Purim. And my takeaway from the Megillah, as applied to modern times, but I think even to those times, is that Purim is a day that the Am HaYoshev B'Tzion, that people living in Israel, need to take responsibility. What does that mean? As we say here, Ein ma lasot, nothing to do about it. People are economic beings. They pursue economic opportunities, and they'll go to all ends of the earth to pursue economic activities. Human beings are like that. You know, they want to provide for their families, they want to improve their lot, they want to do better. And economics is a giant draw. That's true too from Kohelet, but where money makes the world go round. I think it was Liza Minnelli who said, but yes, economics is a powerful draw, and I think therefore, you know, as a guy who spends most of his day in business, it's incumbent upon us to build a fantastic economy, a welcome economy and bureaucracy, so that people want to live here. You don't want people running here for anti-Semitism. You certainly want people to come here and build an identity, and not to lose it in, you know, diasporic cultural assimilation. But you have to build a magnet. And I think, you know, 70 years into the founding of the 72 years in the founding of the state of Israel, you know, I think Purim for people who live in Israel is a day of cheshbon nefesh. Really is. It's not a day of getting drunk and losing yourself. It should be a day of cheshbon nefesh. And what are we doing to make this country and this place a better place so that people want to come and we attract them? And I think it's actually going amazing for what it's worth.
You're contributing very significantly.
But it's not as obvious to everyone. There's giant economic opportunity here, and people should come for that reason, and we should create it so that it's obvious that that's the case. And you know, on this Purim, you know, with everything going on in the world, Corona and so many people out of work, and so many people suffering economically, I think it's doubly important. And it's really, in my view, a day of cheshbon nefesh for how we can just increase opportunity here and make sure so many people can earn a living. You know, seeing on Shvut, you know, this I think was Rav Amital's one of his core messages is you have to create a thriving economy so people can earn a decent living. I know it's inspired me, and Yom Purim, Kippurim,
that's right.
Day of cheshbon nefesh for what we're doing as well.
Beautiful. I think that if we put that sub-theme of the Megillah into play together with the values of Emet and Shalom and the Mishlochei Manot, Matanot Leviunim, then hopefully this Purim will be one of sincere Cheshbon HaNefesh, especially for us in Eretz Yisrael. I think this year we can't not undergo introspection with everything going on, as you said, and Be'ezrat Hashem, we should be the ones, this should be the time to create, together with you, these platforms that hopefully will encourage Jews in the diaspora as well to come and develop the future of Am Yisrael here.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. This has been a lot of fun.
We
should do this again.
We really should. We should. This is going to solve the problems of the future of Am Yisrael. And together, through learning Tanakh, living Tanakh, discussing these ideas together, Be'ezrat Hashem. It really was a tremendous book, Michael.
Thank you. Thank you.